Hi, and welcome to the Q&A podcast. I'm your host, Peter Slen. Thanks for listening. This week, we'll talk with two World War II veterans, ages 99 and 100. 16 million Americans served in uniform during World War II, which, for the United States, began December 7th, 1941, and ended with the unconditional surrender of Japan on the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. Of those 16 million men and women who served, less than 120,000 survive today. And this week on Q&A, we talk with two of them, Steve Ellis and Rolf Slen. Both served in the Pacific Theater, one in the Navy, one in the U.S. Army Air Force. Both recount their experiences as 19 and 20-year-olds in the middle of war, their remembrances of the dropping of the atomic bombs, and their personal memories 80 years later. And on a personal level, Rolf Slen is my uncle. This is
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
very special badge given only to World War II veterans. And Steve Ellis is one of those veterans. Mr. Ellis, when and where did you get involved in World War II?
Well, I finished high school at 16, and I went to Tulane University and joined the ROTC unit in September 1941, right before the war started. And that was my involvement. I stayed in the ROTC after the war started. And then in 1944, they commissioned my whole class a year early. I never finished my officer training. I got commissioned at the age of 19 and sent off to join the amphibious forces.
Where?
Camp Radford, Virginia. This was in February 1944. And I was designated to be a gunnery officer. So they gave me 2 weeks training in how to be a gunnery officer. And then I was assigned to a crew, 6 other officers who'd gotten their 2 weeks and whatever they did. And we worked together for 2 weeks. And then we met our crew, all the enlisted men, and we worked with them for 2 weeks. And we got on a train and went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And 4 days after we got there, we got on board the LST 751 and took off down the Ohio River.
And where did you end up?
Well, on that leg of the journey, we wound up here in New Orleans. I got to see my folks, and of course they didn't know where I was. And we were here off and on for 3 or 4 weeks, and then we left to go overseas, and we went straight to the war. Really, we stopped in Guantanamo Bay, Coca-Cola, Panama. We stopped in Espiritu Santo and the New Hebrides Islands. We spent the night in Manus Island, in the Admiralties, and then we went down to Hollandia, which is a nice seaport on the north coast of New Guinea, and we got there the night before they were supposed to launch the invasion of the Philippines. And one of the ships that was going had broken down. So we went out and went bow on with her, and they drove the cargo off onto our ship. And the next morning we were off to the war. Made D-Day at Leyte Gulf in the Philippines.
And you were at the Philippines, the liberation of the Philippines.
Yes, sir.
What was your job?
I was the gunnery officer on the LST 751. We had 7 40 millimeter guns and 12 20 millimeter guns, all anti-aircraft, around the perimeter of the ship. And every morning and every evening we had the dusk alert and the dawn alert and the Japanese would come in and we would shoot at them. Then after we made our beaching, discharged that cargo, and went back to New Guinea again. Took on another load, came back. I have to tell you, the LST was a real speedy ship. We cruised at 9 knots. Flank speed was 14 knots, so it took us a long time to get anywhere. So for a while, our war devolved into 3 or 4 days in Lady, where we were in action morning and evening, and then 3 or 4 weeks going back to the rear area, pick up another, and come back.
What do you remember about those Japanese Zeros coming in toward your ship? Do you remember being fearful? Do you remember adrenaline?
The one I remember best was when we were on our way to the invasion of Luzon, the big island in the Philippines. Our convoy was under constant attack from the Japanese day and night. And I looked up, and there was one coming right at us. And still out of range, so I waited a few seconds and I gave the order to fire. But I remember seeing him coming at us. I wonder if we're going to get that sucker. I wasn't afraid. Didn't feel any rush of adrenaline. It was just a very calm thing, and we got that sucker. So that was that for us, and being under direct attack. That was twice it happened, and twice we got the plane.
Mr. Ellis, were you on a regular schedule? I mean, did you have a shift, or was this on duty 24 hours a day?
No, we had a regular schedule. I stood watch. Every fourth watch was mine. They rotated, so you never stood the same watch twice in a row. But and that was so 8 hours a day. I was on watch. And the rest of the time, as gunnery officer, I was supervising a group of gunners' mates who we had to keep all the guns in shooting order. We had to keep all of the ammunition tubs full of ammunition. And so we had plenty to do during the day.
You spoke earlier about your training, essentially 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and 2 weeks at the age of what, 20?
19.
19. Was it enough training?
No, of course not. I thought so at the time, but today, with 80 years perspective, I know it was just nowhere near enough. But we did a wonderful job. We had a good captain, and we did a wonderful job on-the-job training, just going down the Mississippi River from Pittsburgh to New Orleans. We drilled and drilled and drilled, and we inventoried, and we studied the ship. And the time we got there, we had a punch list. I built an LST in 4 weeks in the DeVoe shipyard. But on the way down, we carried a bunch of shipyard men with us because there were a few things they didn't get around to. And he did. And by the time we got to New Orleans, we had a punch list about that long, and went in the shipyard down here and did that. And then they commissioned the ship, and we went to St. Andrews Bay, Florida, and did our shakedown cruise for 2 weeks. We got to 2 weeks, yeah. We got to beach it and sail in formation, fire the guns, do all the stuff. But we had 2 weeks to do that, and we came back and got our overseas cargo and all of our ammunition and took off.
Well, you said that you joined ROTC from Tulane in 1941.
Yeah.
What do you remember about those 4 years on the domestic, on the home front?
Well, I only had 3 years because I never did my senior year. They were building amphibious ships so fast. There were 1,051 LSTs and somewhere between 900 and 1,000 LSMs, LCIs, and LCTs. So that's close to 3,000 ships, and they needed warm bodies to officer all of them, and that's why they just took all us juniors, because we had a modicum of training, and the rest of it was kind of up to us and how quickly we could catch on. And I have to say that our crew, our skipper was 26, exec was 24, the oldest man on the ship, one of the enlisted men was 36, one of the officers was 30. The average age of the whole crew was under 20, because that whole deck gang was made up of guys right out of boot camp. Same thing down with the black gang in the engine room. We're really just a bunch of kids, but it's a wonderful testament, I think, to the young men of this country that we were able to get in there and do it well. The minutiae of operating a ship really goes beyond. There's so many little things you have to do every day, and so easy to forget. But we were right on it, right from the start. And I was very proud to say that I was part of that bunch.
You referred to the black gang
Yeah.
down in the engine room. What does that mean?
Well, they're the ones that ran the engines.
Segregated units.
Yeah, we had two 900 horsepower diesel engines sitting down the bottom of the ship in the after section, and they had the same watch as we did. The enlisted men sat every third watch, but they didn't repeat, because the watch that went from 1600, 4 in the afternoon, until 2000, 8, we split into two-hour watches. So they would go 1, 2, 3, and then come to the split watch, and then 1, 2, 3 again. But they're not the same as the ones they had the first time around. And so nobody got to stand. The mid-watch was when everybody hated. That's from midnight till 4 a.m. It took forever. And the next worst one was from noon till 4 p.m. That wasn't as bad as the mid-watch, because at least you could see. But the mid-watch, it was dark. And you can't see anything. You can't see the ships you're keeping station on. You can get reports from a radar man as to what your distance was. You can control the ship that way, but you're really flying blind. And when you're on a run where you don't change courses for 4 hours, imagine how dull that is. Imagine staying awake for 4 hours under those circumstances. Now, I have to say that if any of us ever went to sleep on watch, nobody ever found out about it. Of course, I didn't.
What was life like on the ship? The food, the living conditions?
Okay. Well, one thing about an LST is that we could carry a couple of hundred men in addition to our crew. So we were fully loaded with miscellaneous trucks. We might have 40 or 50 trucks on board, and we would carry the personnel that operated those trucks, or tanks, or whatever it happened to be. And sometimes we would carry men in addition to that. So we had to have food to feed these extra people. So the ice boxes on an LST were about the same size as they were on a heavy cruiser, where they got, a lot of men. That crew was 9 officers and about 120 men. So we ate very well. We had a very good stores officer. He was a Mustang yeoman, and he knew the ropes. And so when he went ashore to get supplies, we got nothing but the best.
Are we talking beef and chicken and?
We had beef and chicken and spam. You don't get any fresh vegetables, no seafood. We had canned food, that cooks were excellent. And from what they had to work with, we ate very well. And we did have a lot of meat. And you could carry potatoes a long time. And so we usually had potatoes on board. Usually had a few apples.
You returned to New Guinea after the Philippines.
Yeah.
How long were you there? What was your next stop?
Well, we went into Hollandia, took on a beach, took on another load of men and equipment, and went right back up. We were probably 3 or 4 weeks in the round trip.
Was there periods of boredom when you were out on the sea?
You got to believe it. You kind of bored all the time. We had a ship's library. We'd all read all the books in the library. We had don't tell anybody this, we had a poker game going in the wardroom. I got outclassed early on. I learned not to gamble. I'm no gambler. But those guys were still playing poker when the war ended. And they had a couple of poker games downstairs. Below decks, they had a couple of poker games. And every once in a while, we'd go somewhere where you could let your men go ashore, and we'd give them 3 beers each, warm. I had no way to chill.
3 beers.
They get 3 beers each. The guys who didn't drink could sell their beers for untold amounts of money. And they'd play baseball or something, kill time, run around on dry land, and then back they'd come to the ship and back to the old routine. They never got a real liberty until maybe the 3rd time we went to Manila. We were in Manila right after she fell, and then we were back again. And on that trip, we were able to march men, we'd line them up and walk them through the city so they could see it. But the 3rd time they were there, we could have port and starboard liberty. I mean, half the crew would go ashore one night, and half the crew would go ashore the next day. And so I was OD off to the deck the day, when it was time to go pick up the crew. So I rowed the boat in, just in case there were any disciplinary problems. And there were none, because when we got there, everybody was there, but only one of them was standing. We had to load them in the boat like cordwood. You had to remember, those poor guys had been on that ship then for over a year. And the most fun they'd had was playing baseball or drinking a warm beer. And they made the most of that. I mean,
What was when the Philippine people saw you in the streets? Was there a response to the American soldiers?
I don't remember one. Of course, we were there right after the old city fell the first time, so we didn't get to go around. And the next time was a couple of months later, and they were probably used to it by then. Only thing I remember is an Indian family, Indians from India, and all wearing the turbans, and the father up front, and the mama carrying a baby, and then about 10 children behind them like that. Life goes on.
1945, the atomic bombs are dropped. Where were you at that time? Do you remember? And when did you learn about it?
We were at sea. I think we were probably in the Sulu Sea, maybe on our way from Manila back to Leyte Gulf. Leyte was a big supply depot, and everything went out from there. Well, I think we were on our way. We heard about it, and it kind of shook us up a little, because that kind of war was unknown. Up in one bomb that could destroy the city, and we knew that much. And I think we were still on our way back when the Japanese indicated their willingness to surrender, which was around the 14th or 15th of August. And so we got back to Lady Gulf, and we stayed there the rest of the month. And on September 2nd, the admiral who was in charge of the whole scene there ordered we have another spontaneous celebration that night. So that night, everybody shot their guns off.
On the ship?
Huh?
On the ship?
Oh, yeah. We fired our guns, small boats. We lowered our small boats, and they went out and had flare war, shoot flare guns at each other. And we opened up the beer locker, and everybody kind of got a little drunk. But it really wasn't exactly as spontaneous as the Admiral intended. It was kind of a ho-hum celebration. But that was it. And that was our war. We took 2 loads up to Japan and left them Tokyo, Yokohama, one of those places. And then we stayed there after the second trip and spent our time distributing those troops around the island. We did that for about 6 months. We got up to Hokkaido and the north end of now I'm forgetting the big island's name, but the one where Tokyo is. We went to the Sendai Arsenal. We saw a lot of good stuff, and one of the things we saw was Hiroshima. And we were in the inland sea, Eddie Martin and I. Eddie was another officer on the ship. He'd been a classmate of mine at Tulane, and we'd been roommates while the ROTC unit was on active duty, and our parents had known each other, so we'd known each other since we were little children. And anyhow, Eddie bummed a Jeep off somebody. We drove over there, and I promise you that we driving through the outskirts of the city was nothing. And all of a sudden, we never saw a sign saying, keep out, danger, nothing. We just drove into this area of utter desolation, like somebody had drawn a line. Here's a little bamboo and paper house sitting here, and here's nothing. And so we drove right in the middle of the city, and there were a couple of the steel and concrete buildings. The structure was still there. And so we went up on top of a 5-acre one, and Eddie took pictures looking in all directions. And we got our fill of it, and we got in the Jeep and went back to wherever we'd come from. And to this day, nobody has said, beware of radiation or anything like that. I guess my children were born with one head each, so I suppose that we didn't get much radiation, if any.
Did you meet Japanese people after the war when you were driving around Hiroshima? Or
yeah.
what was their reaction to you? Do you remember?
Well, one thing I remember in particular, and when we were at the Sendai Arsenal, that was the biggest arsenal the Japanese had. It was up the coast from Japan, and we were there, and we borrowed another Jeep, and we were driving around. And as we came down the street, the people would come out of their houses and bow as you went by in your Jeep. Very good for your ego. And we saw a Kate, one of the Japanese planes. One of the planes we shot down had been a Kate. So we decided we'd go over and take a look at it, and we made a U-turn and went back. And we walk around looking at the plane, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of kids comes running out of the building. And it turned out it's a school, and the schoolmaster had a little English. The kids had none at all. So I said to one of them, I said, "You learn to fly?" And he said, "No." Now these kids were 12 or 13 years old, and they were teaching them to be kamikaze pilots. And I just shudder to think what it would have been like if we'd had to invade Japan. We were scheduled, we were going to do it in 2 phases. One, they were going to invade the southern island, and then they were going to come around and invade the entrance to Tokyo Bay. We were scheduled for D-Day at the entrance to Tokyo Bay. And I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if we'd had to do that, because their defenses there were just really fearsome.
So on your ship, they were keeping you updated as far as the plans for the invasion of Japan.
Yeah, we had the op order on board. We knew. Matter of fact, when the war ended, we were on our way back to Lady Gulf to practice. We always practiced our invasion, and we were so good at it. You know, it was really, really remarkable how good we were. You know, in Europe they had maybe 4 or 5 big invasions: North Africa, Sicily, Italy. Two more small ones on the coast of Italy, and then the big one over in Normandy. That's maybe 5 or 6 invasions in Europe. We had over 100 invasions in the Pacific. So it just, they could do one and they could do another one 2 weeks later. That campaign up the spine of up the backbone of New Guinea was just amazing. They would take, and they'd decide, well, let's see, we can skip this one and this one, and we'll take the next one, and they just leave these Japanese marooned, no supplies, no nothing, nowhere to go, because you can't move through that jungle. If you do, somebody's liable to take your head and hang it on the tree.
Steve Ellis, when you look back, you're 99 years old now.
Yeah.
But looking back, can you imagine doing this at 20 years old?
Oh, no. No, when I look at what my children were like when they were 19 or 20 years old, there was just no way they could have done that. But I do remember that when we got this unexpected news that we were going to be commissioned in 3 weeks. We had 3 weeks, just enough time to buy the uniforms. We were going to be commissioned in 3 weeks and go to war. I felt nothing but delight. I just knew it was the right thing for me. Yeah.
Why?
I was tired of going to school, for one thing. I really kind of wanted to go to war, and this was a chance to do my duty, and I was happy to have it.
Was that a common feeling among your peers?
I would think so, yeah. I'd never talked to anybody who was sorry that happened to them, before or after. Well, look, how many 19-year-old boys get a chance to run a division on a fairly sizable ship? Because I didn't be responsible for the defense of that ship. I also I was a navigator for a while. Now, in ROTC, I took one course in piloting, and piloting is offshore navigating, going along the coast, and celestial navigation. We learned out of a book how you do that. But I got to be the navigator because the navigator ran our ship into Ship Island one night when he was supposed to be taking a left turn. He just, bam, and the next morning the captain relieved him, and he said, "Mr. Ellis, you're the navigator," because I was the assistant navigator. So then I was the navigator of this ship, and I remember when I took my first star sight, I didn't know the first star from another star. And I got the book out and I looked and I figured out where at dusk that evening, which star was going to be, and I wrote down all the things, and I went out there with the sextant and the quartermaster, and I looking and finally I see one of them up there right where he's supposed to be, so I shot that. It took about 3 or 4 star sights. And I did that, and I got away with it. It's when we were going down to Guantanamo Bay. I got away with it, and I navigated us across the Caribbean into the Coca-Cola, and then all the way across the Pacific. And when we got to the New Hebrides, he gave the job to somebody else, and I went back to Watchtown. Thank God. But by that time, I knew how to do it. I'll tell you, those first few days, it was touch and go. I remember when we were heading back to New Orleans from Gulfport, where we'd loaded up for overseas. We were going back to New Orleans to get our ammunition. That's the last thing they put on the ship. And we were popping along there, and I'd taken a sunline. I'd done everything you could possibly do. And the captain said, "Mr. Ellis, when do we turn for the seaboard?" And I said, "Right now, Captain, here's your course." And that course took us right along the edge of the shallow water. An experienced navigator would give himself a couple of miles extra room. Not this guy. Right along the edge, hit that sea buoy on the, that's the LSTs right now on that screen. But we hit the sea buoy right on the nose.
When you see that video playing, does it bring back memories?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. And I've been coming here one day a week
To the museum?
Yeah, for about 8 years now. And so I've had plenty to remind me of what happened to me during the war. I have to tell people. You know. Some of them don't want to talk about me at all, but they want to tell me their uncle was in the Battle of the Bulge, or their daddy was there. One came through that said, "My great-grandfather." I said, "Oh my God, great-grandfather, how old am I?"
How do people react when they see this World War II veteran tag on you?
A great many of them come up and shake my hand, say, "Thank you for your service." Or they will nod at me, but they all notice.
You were one of 16 million in uniform.
Uh-huh. Right. Now, I don't know how many of us are left now. Maybe
About 119,000.
Is that right?
Yep. How were you able to get news on the ship? A lot of famous battles were going on when you were over there, Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal.
Well, a radioman would pick it up, and
he'd
they
share
published it. Yeah, they'd publish a little paper every once in a while. They'd tell you what was going on in the world. Those radiomen were remarkable. They'd be sitting in there 4 hours at a crack in front of a typewriter wearing headphones, and they'd each be monitoring a different circuit. There was the Fox, I can't remember now. But you go in there and they're typing away, and you could talk to them. They could talk to you about the World Series and all the time. This information coming in their ear and down their arms and out their fingers.
Were you able to communicate with your families?
We wrote letters, that's all.
And would you receive letters?
Oh, yes.
Would any of those letters be censored?
The ones that he received, no. The ones that we censored everything that left the ship. That was one of our jobs as officers. We censored all of the mail that the enlisted men wrote, and we were on our honor not to do that, not to send anything, not to write anything we weren't supposed to, because we did not censor each other's mail. And I never did. I assume that the other guys never did either.
Mr. Ellis, have you been back to that area since the war?
No, sir, not any at all. I never had any desire to go back to that area.
Why?
Well, there was nothing to make any impression on. You beach on a place and it's ugly, and you're under stress. I remember I walked over one day into the town of Tacloban, which is the capital of Lady Island, and it was just so grubby. It was grubby, and even Manila. When I was there, it had been the Japanese almost destroyed it, defended it, and it was ugly and smelly. And the Pasig River, where we went in to pick up our crew after Liberty, was just ugly and smelly. I never saw anything that I wanted to go back and see again. I don't mean to denigrate the place of the people, because the Filipinos are fine people, and they ran a fine resistance while the war was going on. But I just never started thinking, I want to see it again. I don't want to go back to Japan, none of those places. Shanghai, no.
When did you return to New Orleans, and what kind of work did you do after the war?
Well, let's see. I was right before my points were up. I was sent to China, and I was commanding officer of the LST 1026, and I took it down to French Indochina and picked up some Chinese troops and carried them up to Manchuria and put them ashore. When I got back to Shanghai, my relief came on board, and I was got on a ship back to San Francisco, and I was 4 days being processed there, and 4 days on the train coming. Can you imagine that? 4 days to get from San Francisco to New Orleans. The day after I got back, I was separated from the service, and the next Monday I was back in college. I didn't know what I wanted to do.
You were back at Tulane that next Monday?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd been in civil engineering, and the only thing I was sure of was I did not want to be a civil engineer. So I spent a year in journalism school, and that didn't do it for me. I got a degree in geology, and when I went to get a job, nobody was hiring geologists. I went to Houston, hit every oil company in Houston, nobody. And so when I got back, I was about to get married. And I told my fiance, I said, I can't find a job. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I thought I might try law school. She said, okay, I'll get a job. And she got a job, and I went to law school, and that's what I did. I was a lawyer for about 10 years, and I was a judge for 20-some years, and I retired from that when I was 58, I think. And since then, I have done a lot of ad hoc, filling in for other judges. I liquidated an insurance company. I spent 20-odd years as independent counsel for the State Board of Medical Examiners. And when I was 90, I quit my last job. I figured I'd worked long enough. And now I hang around the house. I'm taking violin lessons. And I'm not good for much else, you know.
And volunteering here at the museum.
Volunteering here at the museum, right.
Well, the Honorable Judge Steve Ellis. Thank you, sir.
Uh-huh.
And now joining us on C-SPAN is Rolf Slen. Born in Madison, Minnesota, May 28, 1924, volunteered for the Army Air Force in 1942. At age 18, Rolf Slen, what was the Lonesome Lady?
The Lonesome Lady was the exact B-24 airplane that I and the rest of my crew flew during World War II.
What was your job on the Lonesome Lady?
I was the navigator, and it was my job to make sure that the pilot got to where he wanted to go and get back from where we had gone.
And where you went was the Pacific Theater of World War II. What was the job of the B-24 in the Pacific Theater? What were you trying to do?
The B-24 had only one job, and that was to drop bombs on various Japanese targets. That was its only one and only job.
How many missions did you fly during your time in the Pacific?
I flew 40 missions from starting in November of 1944 to August 1945.
And what is a typical mission like, if there is such thing as a typical bombing mission during World War II?
Well, there wasn't really a typical mission. They varied in length from 5 hours to 13, 14 hours, depending on the target and that sort of thing.
Over the course of 14 hours, how much are you navigating? How much are you under actual attack or anti-aircraft guns? And how often were you under attack from Japanese planes?
Hours and hours of those 14 hours were spent just going over water. And I would say that in our 40 hours, we probably were attacked by Japanese anti-aircraft fire most of those times, by Japanese fighter planes probably fewer than 5 or 6 times.
What is the Navigator's job when a B-24 comes under attack, anti-aircraft fire or planes?
The Navigator's job is simply to get to the initial point. The initial point is the point from which the bomb run starts. And once we're on the bomb run, the Navigator has nothing to do but sit and hope that everything works out okay. It's a matter of coordinating, a careful coordination between the pilot and the bombardier. The bombardier is trying to get the pilot to fly as level and even a flight as possible. In fact, he doesn't want the pilot to even touch the controls, because the bombardier, in manipulating his bomb sight, is really flying the plane at that time.
What do you remember from those bombing missions, the smells, the sounds, those times when you were on that bomb run? What comes back to your memory after 80 some years?
On the bomb run, that's when the anti-aircraft fire from the Japanese below starts to get close. And on a dangerous mission, the anti-aircraft shells are exploding all over the place. And the Navigator, namely myself, is just sitting there hoping that the bombardier will say bombs away, and the pilot can take over again and get out of the flak that's coming up at him, at us.
What's the scariest moment of a bombing run?
When the anti-aircraft shells are getting closer and closer, and when they get really close, you can even smell the odor of the cordite, which comes from the exploding shell. And when you can hear it, and when you can smell it, and that's the scariest part. That's when you have to control your fear and just do the best you can for the Navigator to do nothing until the bombardier says bombs away.
What does cordite smell like? What brings back that smell to your mind?
Smell of a burning smell comes from the exploding anti-aircraft shells that are nearby.
You're relying on the rest of the crew, you said, to do their jobs as well during that time. How many members make up a crew of a B-24 during a World War II mission? 10 of us. A pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, and 6 gunners, and a radio operator, and a flight engineer. And did you stay with the same 10 men during all 40-some missions that you flew?
Yep, all the same, yep.
Did you ever lose one of your fellow pilots or gunners during a mission, or did they get injured at all?
No, it was really amazing. None of us ever got injured. Our plane was hit a number of times, only one time or 2 times when it was really dangerous. But most of the time, we just got kind of shell marks on the plane, which didn't matter very much. But on one mission, an anti-aircraft shell, 75 millimeter, went right through our wing, and we were in danger of losing a lot of gasoline and exploding, but never did explode. None of us ever got injured, even though we were very close to it many times.
You say you remembered miles and miles of ocean water. What was it like flying a plane with a hole in its wing over miles and miles of ocean water trying to get back home after that mission?
Very scary. I was worried that the wing might fall off, but we couldn't tell exactly. I couldn't tell exactly where that shell went through the wing. I remember the pilot asking the flight engineer to take a real good look at it, because if the wing was going to fall off, we'd have to bail out before that happened. If it wasn't going to fall off, then we'd want to land and get off on the ground.
And is that landing one that you particularly remember, coming back from that mission with the hole in your wing? And what's the feeling when you land a plane after one of these missions?
Oh, I remember very clearly when we landed. We were based in Okinawa, but they wouldn't let us land on our regular air base. I think it was because they thought we'd just mess up the whole landing pattern. So they diverted us to a small island called Shima, which is close by. So we landed there without any incident. And we were all scared, actually, frightened and relieved at the same time. I remember one of the members of the crew got out and he tossed his Mae West and he tossed his parachute on the ground, and he said, "I'm never going to fly in another blankety blank B-24 again for the rest of my life." We were all very relieved to get out, and pretty shaky, actually.
Did that crew member fly again?
He did. He certainly did. Yep. He changed his mind, and he flew again in a few days.
We've used the term scared a couple of times. How often during 40-some missions would you say that you were frightened, you were scared?
There's always tension because you don't know what's going to happen. But I would say that on most of the missions we were just, I wouldn't say we were frightened on most of the missions, but on some of them it was quite terrifying, actually.
I want to focus on one mission in particular. In 1945, July of 1945, what was the Haruna?
The Haruna was a Japanese battleship which the press said was sunk by a brave American soldier back in 1941. That was actually false. It was sort of a story cooked up by the press to make the American public happy. The Haruna was not hit in 1941, so far as we know, and fought with the Japanese all during the war. At the end of the war, it was bottled up in what's known as Kure, K-U-R-E, Kure Harbor, just south of Hiroshima. And on July 28th, 1945, they sent us up to try to destroy the Haruna once and for all. Each of our planes carried 3 2,000-pound bombs. So we had a total bomb load of, each of us did, of 6,000 pounds. And that was the heaviest load we ever carried. We led the squadron on that particular flight, and the anti-aircraft fire was terrible. There were 6 of us to start out. 2 of them had to turn back with mechanical problems, so that left 4. We got up to the target, and one of the planes we were with peeled off and went after a cruiser instead. There were many, many Japanese battleships, cruisers, destroyers in Curie Harbor. But my pilot and navigator went right after the Haruna. And I learned afterwards that we probably did not hit the Haruna with any of our bombs, but that my bombardier probably came as close as any of them. And the Haruna never left the Curie Harbor again after that time.
And were you flying the Lonesome Lady that day?
We were not. The Lonesome Lady was shot down that day, in addition to another plane flying right next to us, and we never saw them again. Although many of the guys on our plane saw parachutes coming out of both of those planes. I did not, because I was sitting in a place where I couldn't see them. But the anti-aircraft fire was just intense. My pilot finally asked me for a heading home, and I yelled at him, 180, 180. 180 is due south towards our base, and we finally got out of there. And that's when we got the hole in the wing with a 75 millimeter shell.
Why?
And
Go ahead.
And that was the worst of the worst missions we were ever on.
Why weren't you flying the Lonesome Lady that day, and what happened to that crew? What did you find out later?
The reason we weren't flying it was because we had some mechanical equipment in our plane, and I don't know what it was actually, that the Lonesome Lady did not have. We were leading a six B-24s that day, and it was thought that we needed that particular equipment. And so a crew flying only flying its second missions of the year was shot down. And that's a long, interesting story in itself that we probably don't have time for now.
Did you end up, over the course of after that mission, did you end up bombing Tokyo itself?
Oh, no, we never got near Tokyo. No, the B-29s bombed Tokyo and many other cities in Japan, but we never got near Tokyo. The pilot of the Lonesome Lady was captured by the Japanese. They asked him all kinds of questions. He answered all the questions he was asked because he didn't know anything anyway. But they thought he was a valuable source of information. So they sent him to Tokyo on a train and questioned him some more. And he didn't know anything. He just told them his name and that he was flying. They threatened to chop his head off in Tokyo because they thought he was lying. They did not injure him in any way because I think they realized the war was coming to an end, and they didn't want to be accused of any more war crimes. Anyway, he survived. He came back. Liz and I, my wife, met him and his wife at many bomb group reunions. And through a long series of talks and other information, I got a hold of a piece of the Lonesome Lady that was actually transferred to me many years after the war.
Where do you keep that piece of the Lonesome Lady?
Well, I've kept it in our house all this time up until a few months ago. I think I turned it over to the Fargo Air Museum, and I think they have it now.
Just a couple minutes left, Rolf Slen. What do you remember about the final days of the war in the Pacific, the dropping of the atomic bombs and the Japanese surrender? What sticks out in your mind?
we couldn't believe there was such a bomb that could do so much damage. It was absolutely beyond our comprehension. We had been dropping bombs all during the war, and here one bomb came along that could destroy an entire city. So this was totally beyond our comprehension. I remember very clearly I was sitting at an outdoor movie and one night, and there was a lot of noise outside the movie, and then people started yelling, the war is over, the war is over. I couldn't believe it. It absolutely released all of my backed up emotions. And to tell the truth, I started crying. And I didn't want anyone to see me cry, so I left the movie, went back to our tent. And the next day we flew another mission, even though the Japanese had offered to surrender. It was 3 days before the Americans worked out an appropriate surrender offer. We flew one more mission over a target, and we got 100% of the bombs on the target. We came home, and I never flew in another B-24 again the rest of my life.
Rolf Slen, last minute here, you mentioned bomber reunions. Are you still able to make it to bomber reunions? How many of you bombers from that time are left?
Practically none. We don't have any more reunions. There were only 13 of us, I think, that were finally going to reunions. And we just wrapped it all up, and no more reunions. But my wife, Liz, and I enjoyed them. We went to many different cities and learned a lot of what was going on. There was a Japanese man who was only 8 years old when Hiroshima was hit. He got radiation sickness, but he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out what happened, when, and where. And he came to our reunions and spoke, and we all applauded him.
Rolf Slen, 100 years old, veteran, husband, grandfather, great-grandfather, uncle of C-SPAN's Peter Slen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us for the Q&A podcast produced by C-SPAN. Next week, it's a conversation with activist George Takei about his internment as a Japanese American during World War II. A reminder that all C-SPAN podcasts are available to download on our C-SPAN Now app.